2020 has been a very eventful year for reasons that should be obvious. Most would agree that this year has been awful, but personally, I kind of enjoyed this year. I played so many different games, rediscovered my passion for drawing, expanded my music taste, met some great people, and overall I feel much better mentally. Two games I especially love released this year, Persona 5 Royal and Final Fantasy VII Remake. Choosing a game of the year for this year was very difficult, to say the least. I love both of these games, but for entirely different reasons, and they've had a very significant impact on me. But as you can see from the title of this video, I had to settle on Final Fantasy VII Remake, a game that I think is more special to me. It was my most anticipated game ever since it got announced in 2015. You can tell if you watch my video where I explained why I'm excited for it. Since its announcement, I'd watch reaction after reaction and look up all the latest news. If you're familiar with the reaction videos, you'd know Maximilian Dude, who was the primary YouTuber I used to watch. I remember thinking at the time, what a time to be alive. But I didn't anticipate not seeing the game again for another 4 years. The game wasn't shown again until a certain state of play in 2019. The event began with the cursor sound replacing the PlayStation beep that you'd normally hear, and it ended with a brand new teaser running on the Unreal 4 engine. This was huge. After hearing the game was brought in-house and onto Unreal Engine 3, I was completely enthralled by how amazing it looked. It's still so surreal to me that I got to play this game, to dive into that world and get lost in the lore once again. It was a pipe dream to experience a retelling of one of my favourite narratives in video games, with modern graphics, a revamped soundtrack, voice acting and real-time action gameplay. I can't believe that I actually owned this game, that there's still more to come. It's everything I wanted and more, and this video explains why. I played the original game at the literal end of 2015. I don't know how, at the time, I had the patience to play through the game at that slow of a pace, because I sure as hell don't have that patience today. Anyway, the game had an incredibly intriguing plot. Playing as a mysterious, apathetic protagonist, meeting a diverse set of characters who you grow to love. The game was very limited due to the hardware. There was no voice acting, so you had to read text boxes, which are notorious for their translation and spelling errors. How the characters were perceived were dependent on how you read the text bubbles, which offered some very unique takes and interpretations. Yet, a majority of fans would agree that the game provided an unforgettable experience with its narrative. And the same could be said for this first part of this remake. With the existence of the remake, it allowed Square Enix to take advantage of the modern hardware. Characters would be fully voiced and mocap, which Square took liberty with by recasting the entire main cast. Personally, I'm a big fan of the new cast, and I think they do a much better job at portraying the characters in a way that favours the story and the characters' personalities. The story of this first part takes place entirely in Midgar, which lasted around 5 to 10 hours in the original game. Midgar is the capital city of the world Gaia, and the power base of Shinra, an electric power company who uses the planet's livestream to supply Mako power and electricity. Mako is the name of the liquid form of the planet's livestream. The protagonist of our story is Cloud Strife, an ex-soldier from the First Class Division. Soldier is the fighting division of Shinra, which highlights how powerful Shinra is as a company. The story starts simple, with Cloud seeking some mercenary work and meeting up with his childhood friend Tifa to do so. He then entangles himself with Avalanche in their quest to save the world, to prevent Shinra from leeching more of the planet's livestream. However, their methods aren't very favourable, which can be seen in the beginning of the game, where Sector 5, one of the many sectors in Midgar, are devastated due to Avalanche's actions. And from Cloud's involvement with Avalanche, Cloud embarks on an epic journey that gets into all sorts, and it's a thrilling experience, especially in this first part. As I said before, this whole part takes place in Midgar, which is more fleshed out opposed to the original game. The writers took advantage of making the remake a multi-part series, allowing side characters more time to shine and more comprehensive plot points. There are also a bunch of new aspects of the story, which promises a more engaging plot that can intrigue fans new and old. The story is bound to cause some confusion for newcomers. However, watching the characters interact and grow is a wonderful experience, and I recommend the game just for that. There are numerous moments in the game which I believe fans will love because of how attached they've become to the characters. The game has been lovingly created, and I think it's evident from the many things that have been kept the same, even the small stuff. For example, Johnny held pretty small significance in the original game. You didn't really have to pay much attention to him, and he's not really a part of the main story. However, now he's a more memorable side character, part of a very fun questline. I'd love to talk about the game's content in more detail, and I could go on and on, but I'd rather you experience that for yourself. The gameplay of the remake is one of the more polarizing aspects that's divided the fanbase. The original game had turn-based combat, which was quite slow-paced and methodical. Battles usually took place in a static environment with a lack of freedom to do things like blocking or dodging. I didn't really take that much of an issue with the combat when I first played the game, perhaps because I had more patience at that time. But trying to replay the original game without using 3 times speed is a bit jarring and not very fun. I, for one, am very pleased with the real-time combat system in the remake. Many have compared it to Final Fantasy XV since that was an ARPG as well. However, in that game, I felt that the combat left a lot to be desired, and it held your hand quite often. With Final Fantasy VII Remake, the combat is significantly more varied, borrowing aspects from the original turn-based combat and real-time combat found in the recent games. Cloud has a number of weapons in his arsenal which grows as you progress the game, each with a special ability. This ability will use up 1 or 2 of your ATB gauges, which builds up as you attack. If you use the abilities assigned to each weapon enough, you will unlock that specific ability to be used for every other weapon, which is a feature I really like. This applies to other playable characters in the game as well. The ATB gauge is also required to use items such as potions or ethers. I also think that the ATB gauge allows for more freedom and variety in the game, letting you strategize what abilities or items you want to use. Another feature I really appreciate is the ability to choose between pausing gameplay to select a command or allocating shortcuts for your favorite commands. Personally, I prefer to pause the game with the command menu, since it gave me more time to think. As I stated before, there are other playable characters with different fight styles and weapons. Alongside Cloud, they are able to level up their weapons, weapon proficiency, and overall stats. The game allows for you to allocate materia for each character, crystallize Mako that allows the user to cast spells, use summons, grant support abilities, and much more. How you allocate your materia is completely up to you. There are different ways to make them more effective, or you may just rely on your brute strength. Having this amount of freedom to customize characters is more than welcome and adds to the diverse gameplay. The combat is very tactical, at least in my opinion. You'll face countless enemies that vary from one another with a number of ways to overcome them. It's not very restrictive, and I found it fun to strategize. In recent memory, open world RPGs have become more prominent thanks to the success of The Witcher 3, which has in turn spawned terrible clones such as Assassin's Creed Origins, Odyssey, and Horizon Zero Dawn. FF7R offers a linear RPG experience, similarly to the original, which I don't think is very common but works great for the game, proving that RPGs don't need to be open world, unlike some developers think. There are, however, chapters in the game that allow the player to explore and complete side quests. You'll even revisit some areas. I found some of these side quests to be quite enjoyable since they contributed to world building. However, a criticism I have is that many of them are fetch quests and aren't very different from each other. It gets a bit repetitive and boring. While it's entertaining to see side characters interact with our heroes, the quests themselves are largely forgettable. With exploration and movement, I found the game to be quite restrictive and clunky. It reminded me of movement in God of War 2018, where you could only climb specific paths or jump at specific points, which is weird because the old God of War games allowed you to jump at any time, but that's a topic for another day. For instance, you'd be indicated by arrows where you can shimmer through, or you could climb a ladder. Another similarity would be the absence of the jump button, which I think is pretty ridiculous, since I expect most games to let you jump whenever you want. I hope that in future parts the exploration is less restrictive. I wanted to also mention that the game looks breathtaking. Final Fantasy VII Remake has been notorious for the horrible textures commonly found in the slum areas of Midgar. Areas on the upper plate where the rich people of Midgar live looks significantly more eye-catching. It kind of fits since everything looks nicer for the rich people, but I don't think that was intentional. It's an underlying issue that I think needs to be fixed, because it's clear that these texture pop-ins aren't what was intended. The fact that Square Enix hasn't even acknowledged it is a bit alarming and disheartening. I think I've talked enough about how much I love this game, and I would love nothing more but for others to play it. It's one of my favourite games. I'd even go as far as say it's at the #1 spot. And seeing it remade so lovingly puts a huge smile on my face. I'd love for others to feel the same way I do about this game. I'd love to be able to share my enthusiasm with them. It feels so vindicating that after years of being excited for this remake, I can share this feeling of adoration for a game that I think deserves it. Final Fantasy VII was already an incredibly unique game with a gripping narrative, and I know a lot of people think otherwise. And I think that this first part of the remake was incredibly well done. It's exciting to think about what they'll do with future installments, how they'd recreate iconic scenes, or what else they could add. It's often disheartening to see people write it off as another weird Japanese game, because there's so much more to it. But in a world where people favour games with a grounded cinematic story, with such slow gameplay and a huge focus on realistic animations, it's wonderful to see people enjoying this remake and starting to appreciate the Final Fantasy franchise. I hope this video was able to encourage you to play this game if you haven't already. If you have, I hope my sentiments were able to resonate with you. Like always, if you enjoyed, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Also follow me on Instagram @ZahirSensei for my art, link will be in the description. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.